Hello, I'm Amanda Coffey, Deputy Vice-Chancellor and Provost at the University of West of England, Bristol. It gives me great pleasure to welcome you all to the annual Bolland Lecture, part of our Bristol Distinguished Address series of lectures. Welcome to our distinguished speaker, Ben Osborn from Pfizer UK, and also a very warm welcome to members of the Bolland family who I know are joining us from around the world. The Bolland Lecture was established in 1976 to commemorate Dr. Robert Bolland, who held the post of the Director of Bristol Polytechnic from its foundation in 1969 until his death in 1974. Bristol Polytechnic gained university status in 1992, becoming the University of the West of England at Bristol. We are particularly delighted that this year's lecture is associated with Pfizer. For the obvious reasons, of course, given the global pandemic and the extraordinary global times that we've all been living through, but also because of a very personal association that Dr. Bolland had with Pfizer. Dr. Bolland was committed to the concept of practice in industry learning for students, particularly fitting given UE Bristol's ongoing commitment to the provision of practice-based learning. While head of department, Dr. Bolland placed students at Pfizer headquarters. His son recalls visits there with his father and being given tours of labs while his father met with Pfizer colleagues and Bristol Polytechnic students. And so to our event this evening. Our format will be an introduction to our speaker by our partner host this evening, followed by Ben's address. We will then have time for questions from the audience. You can submit questions throughout the event using the question and answer box. These will be moderated and published once the question and answer session begins. We will endeavour to get through as many questions as we can in the time. For those of you who use social media, please feel free to get involved on Twitter using the hashtag Bristol Lectures. We are also recording the event to be uploaded to our media library in due course, where you can also view previous lectures. It now gives me great pleasure to hand over to Jaya Chakrabarti, Vice President of the Bristol Chamber of Commerce and West of England Initiative, to introduce our speaker. I hope you enjoy the event.
Thank you very much, Amanda, it's a pleasure to be here for the annual Bolland Lecture, especially kicking off such a fantastic array of speakers coming up, today's being the primary one I've been looking forward to. The West of England Initiative, which sits at the heart of Business West, is delighted to once again be supporting the Bristol Distinguished Address Series. And as Vice President of the Bristol Chambers of Commerce and Initiative, I'm honoured to be able to introduce Ben Osborn, the UK Country Manager and Managing Director for Pfizer UK since 2018, i.e. before the pandemic and all the way through so far. For those of you who do not know us, Business West is the largest chambers of commerce in the UK. We cover Bristol and Bath, Wiltshire, Gloucestershire. We represent and work with over 22,000 businesses. We lobby, we influence, we do our best to make sure that Bristol, Bath, the West of England remain the best places to live and work for everyone here. It is a great honour to be able to welcome Ben to meet our business community today. Ben graduated from Leeds University and joined Pfizer in 1998. But by 2012, Ben was UK head of Pfizer Oncology, shaping cancer policy. 4 years later, Ben became the Chief Marketing Officer operating across Europe, Japan, Korea, Australia, and New Zealand, leading on digital transformation and innovative partnerships across the whole sector. Now, when I look at the career of such a successful leader, it always makes me want to find out what drives such a person to achieve above and beyond, because there is always a story. Ben recently spoke passionately about his own purpose, his own personal purpose in life, and about transformative change rather than tinkering around with the edges. I learned actually on social media that Ben's own personal purpose has been hugely influenced by family, as mine has as well, especially his 14-year-old son who lives with significant disabilities and epilepsy, and it has shaped Ben's approach to his career and his personal life. He's not prepared to sit on the sidelines. Ben is a board trustee of Young Epilepsy. He channels his passion for long distance running, which I can't do to save my life, into raising money for this and other causes really close to his heart. Needless to say, long distance runners know how to play the long game, which is really lucky because it's a quality we really, really need if we're going to win against this and future pandemics. On partnership, Ben has said, the challenges we all face are far too complex for one party to solve in the future. It will require all of us coming together and partnering in a way that we haven't done so in the past. Well, this he demonstrates perfectly in his role as president of the Association of British Pharmaceutical Industry, which is the industry body that exists to make the UK the best place in the world for research and development of new medicines and vaccines. Indeed, the first of his priorities in that role is about building a more resilient NHS post-pandemic, so that no patient is left behind. That, together with the aim to meet the challenges presented by antimicrobial resistance, environmental sustainability, I think you'll agree with me that we need more of this sort of corporate activism and partnership to fix what humanity has broken. Ben, thank you so much for joining us, and we're very much looking forward to hearing what you have to say that will inspire us all to action. There will be an opportunity for Q&A at the end for everybody. Ben, over to you.
Great. Thank you so much, Jaya, and good evening, everyone. It's a genuine honour and pleasure to join you all this evening and this year for the annual Bolland Lecture. Thank you to everyone involved in pulling together tonight's event, and a special thanks to Jaya and Amanda for their kind and generous words up front. I hope that many of you have actually taken the opportunity to recharge your batteries over the summer and the past 18 months where I'm sure we've all suffered from Zoom and Teams fatigue. And for me, September is always an exciting time of the year. It's a new academic year, it's a new school year, the gradual changing of the seasons, and it's an opportunity to really make good on those pre-summer promises as we head into the autumn. And during my recent summer holiday, I managed to take a break in August with my family down in Cornwall. I found myself really reflecting on what's truly just been a whirlwind 18 months for all of us. For me and the team here at Pfizer, these have been the busiest, most intense, but most rewarding times of our career. And amongst the twists and turns, there are two moments that really stand out. The first was the phone call I took back in November of last year, where I learned of the results from our phase 3 clinical trial for our vaccine. It was both an exhilarating and emotional moment. And the second was weeks later, on the 8th of December, when Margaret Keenan became the first person in the world at 91 years old to receive a COVID-19 vaccine. In just 259 days, together with our partner BioNTech, we were able to develop, manufacture, and get authorization for a new COVID-19 vaccine. It's easy to forget just how extraordinary this moment was when we now see over 5 billion COVID-19 vaccines being administered globally. But what science has achieved in the last year has been nothing short of a major miracle. And that leads me to what I want to talk about this evening. There were lots of success factors, but as we come out of this phase of the pandemic and prepare for a future, I believe we have a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to not just learn from these lessons of the last 18 months, but really apply them across our society. For me, there are 3 building blocks that I'm going to talk about this evening. 1, we must embrace a mission-led policymaking approach. 2, we must value scientific innovation. And 3, we must reassess how we value our own health. And we must value the health of our nation as a national asset now. If we get these foundations right, incredible as it sounds, we can go even further than we've travelled in the last 18 months. I'd like to begin by talking about the power of mission-led policymaking. Thinking about the journey we've been on since the onset of the pandemic, one of the things that's left a lasting impression on me is this real importance of having a North Star for all of us to follow, a laser-like focus on achieving a shared common goal. The response to COVID-19 crystallises this thinking, and particularly the approach taken by the government's UK Vaccine Task Force, the group that's really spearheaded our vaccination strategy, pulling in people from within government, the NHS, and from the wider life science sector in both academia and industry. And this group all came together at a pace and in a spirit of collaboration, innovation that we really needed to solve the pandemic. And I'm fortunate to work closely with this task force on a daily basis and believe that there are some really critical essential elements that can be embraced broadly in the future. First, the Vaccines Task Force was set up with an urgent, clear, and compelling mission shared across all of government and beyond. And this allowed rapid action across previously siloed organisations and departments to ensure rapid decision making. It also provided a single front door for organisations like Pfizer, bringing together all parties to enable a fast and coordinated action. Second, the Vaccine Task Force basically recognised that no single organisation could deliver the mission alone, and that to be effective, external contributors must be seen as an extension of their own team. Key subject matter experts were rapidly identified with early and open engagement to explore partnerships. And for Pfizer, we experienced a new level of transparency and information flow and communication with government, which ultimately helped ensure the smooth, consistent supply of a vaccine. And finally, the Vaccines Task Force adopted an attitude to risk that matched the size of potential benefits to our society from accelerating the availability of COVID-19 vaccines. In 2020 alone, Pfizer invested at risk over 2 billion of our own capital into our COVID programme. Yet without governments taking risk around the world and agreeing advanced purchase agreements for technologies that were still in development, we wouldn't have reached the position we are now, with so many vaccines reaching patients around the world, saving many, many lives. And understanding the need to take risks for big rewards was built into the heart of government decision-making. Beyond the Vaccine Task Force, there are also other examples of mission-led policy-making that we must draw on and learn for the future. The UK's COVID-19 recovery trial, for example, was quickly established following the discovery that dexamethasone, a widely used steroid, was reported to save many lives. Similarly, COVID-19 brought to public attention the UK's impressive genomic sequencing capabilities, driven by the common goal of needing to understand more about the disease scientists were rapidly trying to identify and learn more about. As we look to harness the lessons from the pandemic, the question front of mind for me is how can we apply mission-led thinking to other urgent health issues like antimicrobial resistance? In much the same way that the COVID crisis could not be addressed in isolation, and we relied on collaboration to find a route out of it, the world equally cannot tackle the growing threat of AMR without partnerships. There are many parallels to be drawn between AMR and COVID. AMR spreads quickly, it impacts people of all ages, and particularly those already facing health inequality. The threat of AMR provides evidence of the link between health and wealth, and the potential economic toll of inaction is considerable. In the UK, AMR is estimated to contribute to more than 2,000 deaths, and it costs the NHS nearly £100 million every year. Globally, some 700,000 deaths are predicted to rise to nearly 10 million by 2050 if action is not taken right now. That's more people than die from cancer. And tackling such a considerable health challenge may seem daunting, but how we've worked together during the COVID-19 pandemic offers the blueprint for the future, uniting governments, academia, and industry around a shared challenge that unites us all. And this brings me to my second point, the value of innovation. If COVID has taught me anything, it's that where health is concerned, we must think globally. Many of the causes of disease and ill health are common across borders, regardless of whether you're in Surbiton or Sub-Saharan Africa. This means many of the solutions require global collaboration, particularly if we think of the urgent health threats of today, like obesity. Embracing innovation was an important ingredient to the world's COVID-19 response, placing incredible faith in technologies like mRNA vaccines. But my overriding takeaway is that innovation comes in all manner, shapes and sizes. It doesn't always mean big advances and big investments such as buying new technologies. It's also about adopting fresh approaches and applications to what's already there. It's about taking existing medicines and adapting them to different diseases. It's about taking lessons from one sector or one area and setting and about applying them to another. Pfizer's experiences from the pandemic highlight how a mix of science, data, and technology really is shaping the healthcare landscape for good. Digital innovations in particular are changing how clinical trials are running, for instance. In our COVID-19 clinical trial program, we were analysing data every 4 to 6 hours rather than the usual weeks or months. It's a considerable shift away from where we have been in the past. And as with many innovations forced by the pandemic, it's given the evidence that we need to change for the future. In the case of clinical trials, we've seen that they can be safely and effectively accelerated from decades down to single years. It's possible in the white heat of the pandemic, so can the same thinking now be applied elsewhere? And let's be clear, there is real benefit to our society for this. Improving how we run clinical trials offers the opportunity to achieve life-saving breakthroughs far faster than ever before, meaning we're able to give patients the treatment they need sooner and the benefits that this brings. Another shift in approach is how the NHS has adopted digital patient consultations. Pre-pandemic, remote consultations were rare, but the demands of lockdowns and the pressures of the pandemic on our hospitals and wider healthcare system have made them commonplace. We've all become much more familiar with doing things online rather than in person during the last 18 months, I'm sure with a few failures and technology issues along the way. And while there's still tremendous value in engaging face-to-face, I really believe it's vital now that we don't just default to the old normal as we hopefully exit the pandemic, but that we look afresh to what's the best way of doing things. Utilising existing technologies or adapting well-worn practices will be key. By better supporting and embracing innovation of all forms, shapes and sizes, the UK now has a once-in-a-generation opportunity to become a global leader in life sciences and transform the lives of millions of patients. It was for this reason that I think the government was right to place innovation at the heart of the recently published vision for life sciences in the UK. Seeing Margaret Kiernan receive her first dose of our vaccine was a proud and humbling moment. But I see no reason why in the future the UK patients shouldn't be first to receive life-changing breakthroughs. We've got the raw materials here. We've got a leading life science base. We've got academia. We've got well-known universities. We've got excellent healthcare systems with a rich data set that ultimately can deliver these breakthroughs. And innovation lies at the heart of this wish, and the government now has a golden opportunity to embrace it. Which brings me to my final point about thinking and resetting the health of our nation as a national asset. Earlier, I spoke of two memorable moments from the last 18 months. And alongside a sense of pride, relief, and gratitude, what these two moments have brought home is just how important our health is and how much we value staying healthy, particularly when faced with the immediate threat of a pandemic. The threat and impact of COVID has also highlighted how interwoven our health is with other aspects of our lives, our jobs, our hobbies, even our friendships. Without good health, we cannot live well. Health and wealth are intrinsically linked, and COVID has really magnified and shone a light on this connection. The economic toll of COVID is unparalleled in the modern era. And the World Bank estimates that since the start of the pandemic, just 18 months ago, there's been a $10.3 trillion loss in output. That's nearly 4 times the UK's entire economy measured by GDP. But this pales into insignificance when we consider the toll on human life, the 4.5 million lives lost globally. And even before the pandemic, there was a wealth of compelling evidence to highlight not just the link between health and wealth, but also the benefit of greater investment in preventative healthcare. Estimates suggest that for every £1 we spend on public health interventions, there's an average £14 of benefit to a wider society. Studies also show a 1% fall in in employment leads to a 2% increase in the prevalence of chronic disease. And despite this evidence, the UK's total public funding for healthcare and preventive healthcare is only 5%. This translates as 97 million a year spent on treating disease and only 8 billion on preventing them. Research also tells us that preventative interventions are rarely implemented to their full potential. There may be many reasons for this, but I think often these interventions that support people's long-term health don't show the benefit for many, many years and perhaps decades. And this doesn't easily align with the nature, demands, and drivers of our political cycle. Build Back Better has become one of the political soundbites in recent months. And when it comes to healthcare, I believe we must be challenging this orthodoxy and reimagining how we value healthcare. There are immediate actions that the UK government can take to demonstrate its commitment to improving health and improving our healthcare resilience, including setting health improvements as a core aim of government policy and placing our nation's health on a par with GDP. In fact, solid foundations have already been set here. Dame Sally Davis, the former Chief Medical Officer, has done a fantastic job in setting out her vision for improving health outcomes in her report, Health 2040. And we may have learned a lot from our experiences of COVID, but there's also much work that came before this that we must draw on for inspiration. So in conclusion, COVID has really shone a light on countless issues. It's given us all plenty of time to pause and reflect on what is really important in our lives. Yet in the face of considerable challenge, the world has witnessed some truly remarkable feats of science and human resilience. Frontline healthcare professionals have worked valiantly to the stick. People have sacrificed individual liberties for the public good. And not just one, but we now have 4 COVID-19 vaccines that have been developed, manufactured, trialled, approved, and now rolled out by the NHS at breakneck speed. We've witnessed governments and the private, public sector operating in ways we've never seen before, embracing partnerships and collaboration together to deliver on common goals. And when Pfizer started our COVID journey, we didn't know where it would take us, whether we would be successful, but we were driven by a common belief that science will win. And when I took that phone call in November, and when I saw Margaret Kiernan take her seat to receive the first dose of a vaccine, that belief had been validated. Science had indeed won. When it comes to science, what's happened has been nothing short of miraculous. But the way we've worked, the lessons we've learned, and the experiences we've also had must be a blueprint for the future. By adopting a mission-led approach, by valuing innovation, and reimagining how we value healthcare, we can build on this progress and ultimately deliver breakthroughs that change patients' lives. So now is the time to transform, not tinker. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Ben, for such a thoughtful and thought-provoking talk. And in particular, I think it's given us lots to reflect on in terms of innovation, risk, mission-led collaboration, partnership, which is also important in terms of the ways in which we go about, as you say, transformation rather than tinkering. So now's the time where we'll have the opportunity to engage in further discussion with Ben, and delighted already to see that there are a number of questions coming through from our audience. Just a reminder to colleagues watching that please feel free to continue to submit questions, and we will get through as many of the questions as we can in the time that we have available. So without further ado, Ben, I'd like to start with a really general question, which was a question that I would have asked you, but actually it's come through on the questions from the audience as well, which is something about your own personal reflections, about what you've learnt about yourself and about your leadership and about leadership in general over the last 18 months. So a personal reflection on your own leadership journey and personal journey during the last 18 months.
Yeah, it's been the most incredible period of my career, and I don't think it will be matched by anything I will see in the future. It's tested me, it's tried me more than I think I've ever faced personally and professionally before. I think what I've really learned though is as follows: that our success is not down to any individual. And whilst I have the privilege of leading Pfizer during this most extraordinary time, actually the success that we've had as an organization, the success that we've seen more broadly, is down to many, many individuals. In fact, hundreds, if not thousands of colleagues across Pfizer and BioNTech. And I cannot control what each of those individuals do, what they say, what they do every day. But what I can control is the culture, and I can shape the culture, I can set the vision, and really then empower really, really talented colleagues across our whole organization to bring their very best self to work every single day. I think in the past, I probably got much more into the detail, much more into the weeds on things. And frankly, through this period, I simply couldn't do that. It would not have led to success, and I couldn't take on all of the detail. And I really pulled myself away from that. I think that's the first thing. The second thing is resilience. I mean, I've probably worked, as many colleagues have, not just in Pfizer, across the NHS, across academia, I'm sure, more hours than we've ever worked before. And that's been critical. But you've also really, really got to take time to look after yourself and your family around you. And I've really, really sought to make sure my own health and wellness has been personally a priority for me. So at times when it would have been very easy to sit there and perhaps deal with another few emails, actually quite often what I've done is take time away, either with my family or I've gone out for a run, because I've just needed the mental space and the break to get away from the pressures day to day, to make sure when I then do come back to it, either later on the evening or the following day, I've got the energy levels that's going to be required to deliver this work. Again, I think the learning from the past is, often many of us thought that the more hours you put in, the more you got out of it. There's an element of truth in that, but it's much more, I think, a balance now. And you can't sustain this type of pace long term without really looking at that sort of work-life balance. I think they would be the two key reflections. I still haven't really had the opportunity to deeply pause and reflect, though, and that's something I really intend to do in the coming months.
Okay. Thanks very much, Ben. And just a reminder to our audience, as the questions are popping up on your screens, do feel free to vote for those or to highlight those that you think you particularly like us to turn to. We've had a couple of questions, actually, Ben, around vaccines, really. And I think I might sort of take them both together. So we've got, how do we deal with accusations about the unequal supply of vaccines? Obviously something that's very much been on the top of our agenda, especially to poorer countries. Yeah. And also a kind of subsidiary question, which is really about disinformation and vaccine hesitancy, and whose role it is really to manage that disinformation, particularly in relation to kind of unnecessary deaths. So I wonder whether you could reflect a little bit on the kind of the vaccine landscape, I guess, that we're now in, and something about some of those challenging aspects. And obviously the work that you and colleagues have been doing have been particularly challenging, but there's a much wider context there that you will certainly, I'm sure, have some reflections on.
Yeah, sure. Again, two absolutely critical points. The first around vaccine equity. As we started this endeavour, we knew that, and we believed that, we were only going to come out of this pandemic across the globe if our vaccine reached every corner of the world. As I said earlier on, you have to be able to get a vaccine to Surbiton in the same way as sub-Saharan Africa, because none of us are safe unless all of us are ultimately safe and protected. Now, I think the realities are that very early on, many of the Western world and many of the Western countries were much faster to sign agreements with organizations like Pfizer and other companies. And they were out of the gates much quicker, unfortunately. But we recognized that fairly swiftly. And so we then started to make some critical decisions across our organization. The first is around pricing. We were going to have a tiered pricing to the way that we looked at our vaccines for developed nations. It would be essentially, what we describe as the price of a meal. If you were to go to a restaurant, what you would pay for a main course meal. But for OECD low and middle income countries, what we were going to do is to price that cost. We were not going to profit at all from this. And alongside that, we were going to proactively make sure that despite some agreements not being in place with the developing nations, we were going to hold vaccine for them. And so we made a very public commitment that 2 billion doses of our vaccine were going to reach low and low middle income countries around the world. And that work has already started right now. Now, we still have a long way to go. We are in a privileged position here in the UK that we have, I think it's almost 88% now of our population with 2 doses. Many countries around the world are very low, double digit or even single digits, and that's something we must address. What I will flag is it's not just about vaccine supply. In fact, the latest data from the most reliable source, an organization called Affinity, suggests that there'll be over 11 billion doses available this year. And that's more than enough to reach across the population this year and through next, and that figure will only increase. But it's addressing infrastructure and making sure that many of these developing nations have the healthcare system and the logistics in place to safely distribute and deploy that vaccine. And then also, and it leads me actually onto the second part of the question, which I sort of take as vaccine hesitancy and some of the misinformation. Unfortunately, some of the poorest nations around the world have some of the lowest levels of vaccine uptake, not just on COVID-19 vaccines, but historically across a range of different vaccines. And that comes from some very long, deep-seated beliefs and cultural beliefs often. It's a conversation that we've had locally here in the UK with government right from the very, very start. And I can't sit here and say that unfortunately there's a magic wand that we can wave over this, but I'd offer the following. Firstly, I'm always delighted when people challenge me and ask, the really probing, thoughtful questions about vaccines and are they safe? How come they were so quickly developed when it would normally take 10 years? Because it's an opportunity to talk through the extremely rigorous development steps, the regulatory steps, and the independence that goes with developing and authorizing a vaccine. That independence from Pfizer, from AstraZeneca, from other companies, that independence from the NHS and from government. And that gives me a level of reassurance. The other piece, though, is there is a huge amount of misinformation out there. And what we have sought to do with the NHS and with government is to work with tech companies to really help them to ensure that they've got the right, timely, accurate, truthful information at the right time as swiftly as we possibly can, and to highlight that misinformation. But sadly, it is so prevalent across all of the different particular social media channels that it's like a sort of whack-a-mole. As soon as you get rid of one YouTube video, there's another popping up. And so I think this is going to be a challenge that we're going to face for many years to come. But again, I go back to the evidence that after the provision of clean water and sanitation, the single most effective public health intervention any government can make around the world is the provision of vaccines. And a COVID vaccine is no different there. So a huge amount. And then the final piece I would offer is we recognised, it would be very easy for people like myself, government officials, NHS officials, to be talking publicly about this. But unfortunately, we are the very people that are not trusted, unfortunately. And so what we've recognised is in each community, in local communities, whether that's the local religious leader, the local pub landlord, the local sports leader, there are individuals who are deeply trusted and will always be trusted in their society. And we need to work and partner with them to make sure that they have the right information, the accurate information that they can then help communicate across their community and society. And I think what we've seen is some very, very tailored, focused programs actually have led to some dramatic uptakes in local communities where we would have perhaps expected more challenge.
Thanks very much, Ben. There's another question here on the vaccine, and then we'll move on, I think. But any reflections on the differences between the UK vaccine programme and other countries? Obviously, we've heard a lot about how successful the UK vaccine programme has been, and the figures that you've just given us indicate that. But do you have any reflections on, why is it that we have been able to do what we've done over a lot of other comparable countries?
Yeah, I think much of the credit goes to Dame Kate Bingham, who was the chair of the Vaccines Task Force, as we all know, and she came in with a very different mindset, and she came in with a mindset of collaboration across government, NHS, industry, academia, but also one of agility and a recognition that government were going to need to take some investment risks in a way that perhaps they wouldn't have done traditionally. Kate has deep experience in this from her sort of her day job, and she, with many experts, recognised that this was a high risk endeavour. Not all of this innovation and this technology, this science was going to work, and so they needed to understand where it was most likely to be successful, where they had the deepest confidence. And then, frankly, place some bets, some financial bets, some very big financial bets that those companies, those academic collaborations were going to be successful. Because what that meant is by making those decisions early, the UK was well positioned to take supply rapidly once the regulatory authorization was in place. So I think that's the first piece. The second piece is I think credit must go to the NHS. And what the NHS has done has been just absolutely miraculous, both in terms of continuing to treat the sick and the unwell, not just with COVID, but across many different disease areas, but to deliver so many vaccines across our society, from major cities through to the most rural of our populations across all different age ranges, and they did so in collaboration and knowing that speed was absolutely critical here. And so again, I think the NHS is pretty unique on a global basis. We have a healthcare system that is essentially one across all nations, and that again was tremendously helpful in terms of rapidly making decisions, but then also deploying that vaccine in a consistent way across all four nations and all four healthcare systems. So yeah, they would be the immediate reflections. And I would finally say it comes back to the piece that I mentioned during my talk about a mission-led approach. There was a very, very clear mission at the start of this. No one needed to lay it out in detail for each of the individual partners. We all got it. We all knew instinctively the role that we had to play, and we've collaborated in a way like never before. And I hope that continues for the future now.
That brings us on to another question very nicely, Ben, which again is a question about reflection, really. So, looking back over the past 18 months, if you could go back, would you have done anything differently?
I mean, there's lots of little details that you look at, and sometimes you do sweat that small stuff. I don't think there are any major decisions that we've taken that we would have done differently at the time. And I think what we need to remember, and I say that because actually none of us, government, NHS, Pfizer, myself, had ever faced this before. We didn't necessarily always have the information that we then subsequently had months down the line. So many of the decisions that we were taking were being made in real time, sometimes with not all of the data. I should reinforce that was never the case with the clinical data. We always had full data and full sight of the safety and efficacy side. I mean, just some of the supply data coming through, some of the challenges that we had in terms of deliveries. It is much easier now in hindsight to look, but at the time, I think we got the majority of things right, to be honest.
Okay. Thanks. And obviously talking about looking backwards, but also there's some questions that we've had from the audience around looking forwards and around lessons learnt. So perhaps we'll move on to some of those, if that's okay. I'm going to read out this question. Actually, there's a really nice bit at the beginning, which is very proud of the achievements of all our scientists and industry in this pandemic. Well done. And then the question that follows that is, can science get humanity ready for or help prevent the next pandemic? So I guess it's something around lessons learnt about how we might do things differently.
Simply put, we have to, and that can't just be UK government alone. I'm very, very positive that now we are looking at this through the lens of the G7 and even wider collaboration across the globe, because we've seen the devastating impact of this pandemic, and unfortunately, it is very likely that in many of our lifetimes, we will see some form of other pandemic. Now, it may not be the scale, the size, the type of virus that we've seen in COVID, but we are going to face some significant health challenges. And I come back to the point that I made around antimicrobial resistance. That is the sleeping giant. It's the chronic COVID in my mind. Unless we get on top of that and we really do ensure that we rid our society and rid our healthcare systems of antimicrobial resistance, then the very, very simple operations and procedures that we take for granted, such as a hip operation, will not be possible in the future. That surgery would simply not be feasible, because the risk of infection afterward, or the likelihood, would be so high. And many of the other innovations across science, again, would not yield benefit, because unfortunately we would see society and individuals brought down by many of these microbes. So yes, I think we can, and I think there is tremendous amount that can be done, and it is already starting right now, and we're around the table with government and at the highest levels globally to play a part in that. We've shown that science can move rapidly. Who would have thought that we could develop a vaccine in 259 days when that time frame would normally be 10 years? And we weren't alone. We've had 4 companies move in a similar time frame, all producing a safe and effective vaccine. So we've done it now. We need to now take those learnings for the future.
Okay. And that brings us on very nicely to a couple of other questions that we've had, which really extend, or give you an opportunity, I think, Ben, to extend what you've just been talking about. So you've obviously mentioned AMR and the challenges and the opportunities there in relation to science. But we've had a question about what other health challenges might benefit from that mission-based approach. So that's something about, are there other areas that we might want to explore? And that fits in very nicely with another question that we've had, which is, quite rightly, we've all been very focused on COVID. But there's a little bit about, what should we be focusing on next? What should science be focusing on? What are you going to be focusing on? So there's really thinking about, again, how we use that mission approach and think about where we go next.
Yeah, it's a great question. I think the mission-led approach can actually be applied broadly across healthcare and all disease areas. But I recognise that we can't take a vaccine-like or vaccines task force-like resource approach to all of the disease areas that impacts our society. That's just simply not affordable. We don't have the resources across government, industry, academia, or others. I think, but the mindset can be taken. And so I'll split it into 2 parts. I think in terms of the big disease areas that are impacting our society, one is, I go back to antimicrobial resistance. We must take a mission-led collaborative approach globally towards that. We have to look now at how we essentially age with health, and particularly around some of the neurological conditions, dementia, Alzheimer's. We've seen, unfortunately, I think just the tip of the iceberg and the impact of that in terms of an individual's health, but then the wider impact on society, social care, and their families as well. So that would be number two. I think cardiovascular disease, despite some of the incredible scientific advances of recent years, is still a significant burden from a mortality point of view. And I think there is a lot that we can do to bring science to bear on that. And then the final one, unfortunately, is cancer. It continues, across a range of different tumor types to be a devastating condition. Unfortunately, we still have many cancers that are uncurable and some that are barely treatable, to be honest. But as we're now learning much more about cancer and the genetic drivers of that, I hope that then the scientists in our labs and then academia and others can really take that knowledge and information to develop treatments for the future. But we mustn't forget the rarer conditions, some of those conditions that impact smaller numbers in our society. Joe mentioned at the beginning, my son unfortunately lives with a very, very rare form of epilepsy. Now that will never be a widespread government or NHS focus. I recognise that. Very few companies invest significantly in that area. But that mindset of collaboration, that mindset of agility, and that mindset of science will ultimately win, and how fast can we take the science, can absolutely be now played out with these rarer conditions as well. So they may not get quite the same level of resource, but I think the mindset can take us a long way down that in the future.
Thanks, Ben. And obviously that's very much reflecting on the life sciences and the ways in which coming together and having that real focus delivered huge benefits. We've had a question in around, are there lessons that other sectors could take forward, particularly perhaps some of those sectors that have been hit by the pandemic? So I wonder whether there's any reflections on the approach that you've described that might have, a beyond science kind of application, I guess.
Oh, I find it incredibly difficult to answer that, honestly, with any real clarity. I'm just not close enough, and I don't think I would do justice to other sectors. I'd have people, I'm sure, on Twitter say, no, that's not true. Listen, I think this mindset of collaboration, I think we can all learn from. Not just in our professional lives, our academic lives, but also in our personal lives as well. I've seen how just, the street that I live in, many residents just didn't know each other, and they were just a few doors down, but they connected, they supported each other in a way that we probably never would have if it wasn't for the pandemic. And that collaboration, that support, that more societal mindset, I think is something that we all can absolutely take forward. And I think that business has a really critical role to play in that, and that really does go cross sector.
That's a great answer without stepping on the toes of other sectors that you're not so familiar with. I want to bring you back, if I may, to the sort of the speed really with which we rolled out the vaccine and the vaccine was developed. And also something that you mentioned in your talk around risk and the kind of risk to benefit, I guess, and how innovation is around risk and is around failure as well, actually, because that's how innovations are made. And we've had a question here, really, I guess, about how do you do some of that balancing work? The question is really around, fast drug testing has been beneficial, and you've reflected yourself on clinical trials getting quicker. But how do we balance that with longer term risk of the unknown, I guess, and the example that's been given by our questioner is really an example like thalidomide, where actually we do things with the best of intentions, but then we don't know what we don't know, and how do we balance that risk versus benefit, I guess, is what we're really asking. So I wondered whether you had any reflections on that.
Yeah, I mean, let me start off by saying thalidomide has had a devastating impact, clearly, on many individuals, and has had, a really, really significant consequence for them and their families. I genuinely believe, though, that was a very different time. It was many decades ago, and I think industry, government, regulators learned a huge amount from that. It is devastating, and I think many wish you could clearly go back and change things, but sadly we can't. But what we can do, and what I have seen, is that future decisions can look very differently to those that were obviously taken around thalidomide. Let me bring it to life for you in terms of some of the risks that I think are appropriate. So one of the things that we did was to significantly invest in our manufacturing capacity, to the tune of, in fact, billions of dollars, at a point in time when we didn't even know whether we were going to have a successful vaccine. Now, there was no safety issue around that. That was purely a financial risk. And it was one that we were prepared to take. And we've seen many other companies take as well. So rather than waiting for the full clinical trial program to read out, then take your decision, we actually invested much earlier on in the process. Another simple one would be, the first clinical trial that we did from a phase 3 perspective. Typically, what would happen is the regulators would assess the data to date and would say, okay, you can now begin your phase 3 study. We would take that decision and we would then work to understand where we were going to run our trial. And this could take weeks, if not months in some cases, to begin a study. In this situation, what we did was we decided ahead of time, ahead of that decision, exactly where we were going to run that study. We took the development vaccine to the sites. We had patients lined up, we had clinics lined up, so that when that authorization came in and they were satisfied independently that we could move into that next phase, the next patient, or the first patient, was essentially taken into the clinical trial within a matter of hours rather than potential weeks or months. So for us, the risk is really about a financial risk. It is never ever about patient safety, and that, I think, it will always be the case, and it has to be the case.
Okay, thanks very much. I'm going to move you on to a different topic now, if I may, Ben. Really important topic. So the question is that we've seen throughout the last 18 months that women scientists have demonstrated excellence in the development of the vaccines and in the vaccine programs. And I wondered whether you had any reflections really about how do we attract more women into STEM, which is obviously something we're really passionate about at UE, in terms of making sure that, that we open STEM up to as many diverse thinkers as possible, and to ensure that women are in that mix. So how do we encourage more girls and women into STEM?
Yeah, great question. Something I'm passionate about. I've got a 6-year-old daughter. I would love her to be a scientist or a healthcare professional in the future. What's really interesting is just, from my own daughter's point of view, just the conversations that we've had around the family dinner table, and picking things up on the news, etc. Just hearing about it, talking about it, and seeing some of these role models has created a sort of very different sort of dynamic to the conversation. So I think it has to start at a really, really early age in our educational system. We've got to, rather than waiting till women, young girls, are making decisions about what university degree or even what A levels, we've got to inspire right from the youngest age. So when they're going into nursery, when they're going into primary school, we've got to help to educate that gender is not a driver of whether you're going to go into science or not, and it mustn't be a barrier to whether you're successful or not. So I think there's a really critical role there that we need to do in terms of the educational system. A large part of that I think, is making sure that we've got role models publicly. I mean, I'm delighted now, the leader of the MHRA is a female, June Rain. The leader of NICE, Gillian Lang, is a female. The leader of the NHS now, Amanda Pritchard, is a female. We've got female health ministers. I mean, we've got some fantastic role models now that I think we can all play a part in helping younger generations to be inspired in. But I think beyond that, we've got to really, really now look across our society and really ask the tough questions about the barriers, perceived or real, that exist, and really take some very considered, focused action to remove those. And I look at it not just from a gender perspective, but across a wider range of diversity. There are still far too few ethnic minorities, playing leading roles in science, and organisations, like Pfizer, and some of the major academic institutions across the UK. So, again, I think we've got to really now learn from the last 18 months. And take very considered actions. It goes back to that mission-led approach. If we make it a focus, if we make it a priority for our society, and we put the right mindset behind it, I think we can change.
Thanks, Ben. So we've had a question come in, really, which is a further reflection, and I think fits in very nicely with the kind of mission approach, which is, you mentioned earlier on in your talk around manufacturing capacity. And the question is actually coming from Jaya, which is around supply chain resilience, being critical to that and being able to respond quickly. So it's something about, again, it's around collaboration and partnership, isn't it? So just any observations, I think particularly interesting for our business audience watching. How did Pfizer approach, or how have you approached the whole piece around manufacturing capacity and supply chain resilience?
Yeah, so we started off with a mindset that this was going to be really, really tough. This was going to be incredibly challenging, not just the development side, but the scale-up side. And we were going to need to do it quicker than ever before. And there's many approaches you could take, but there's two schools of thought. One is you really consolidate your resource, your expertise, and you scale from one or two locations, or you go for a much more dispersed model, and get scale in that way. And as we looked at it and we analysed, we believed that the former model, the consolidated model, was going to serve our global population best. And the reason I say that is because it had fewer opportunities for issues to arise. I mean, frankly, if you've got 2 factories versus 10 factories, there are just fewer opportunities. There are fewer areas that you could have a challenge with. Now, on the flip side, if you do have an issue, then potentially during that earlier phase, then it could have a bigger impact. But we were confident from our experience with developing and manufacturing other vaccines that we had the basic infrastructure in place. So we took a very consolidated approach and scaled within just 2 locations globally. What we also did then was worked with a range of suppliers. We have, I think it's about 186 ingredients to our vaccine that come from something like 86 different countries, 86 different suppliers over 20 countries. We could not be in a position where we were just reliant on one individual manufacturer or supplier. So we invested as an organization, we collaborated, we gave expertise and resource to help many of these organizations scale up themselves as well, so that we knew that we had certainty and confidence in our supply chain. And then we worked very closely with government, both here in the UK and around the world, to flag where our big risks were, where we could have challenge, and what support we needed from them to ensure the smooth flow of materials, not just into the UK, but broadly around the world. again, it goes back to collaboration. I think the question that now is on the front of many people's minds is, to what extent should the UK now be building that own capacity and resilience onshore versus a reliance on other nations? And it's particularly topical, obviously, given we're now post Brexit. My belief is, from what we have seen, not just from Pfizer, but from all of the different vaccine programs and wider innovations, is no single country can solve this themselves, and no single country can ever develop a full end-to-end supply chain of a technology that is going to be totally resilient. Actually, resilience really comes from making sure you are collaborating more broadly across the globe. So I think we've got to have a global mindset now as we look to the future with supply resilience. We need to make sure that, for the critical components, we have got sufficient supplies infrastructure within the UK, but that doesn't mean stockpiling everything we possibly can.
Okay, thanks very much, Ben. We've got a question here that starts off just with a thank you, really. Thank you for an enlightening lecture. And the question is really around leadership, which I guess is underpinning a lot of what you've talked about today. So the question is, what one piece of advice would you offer a young leader starting out? And I know that we've got some students who are in the audience, and so I'm sure that they'll be particularly interested in hearing your answer here. So, piece of advice for young leaders starting out.
Yeah, my one piece of advice here would be, know yourself and be yourself. The mistake I made early on in my career as a leader, and through perhaps one or two of my first managerial roles, I worked for some great people. And each time I changed manager or changed roles, what I noticed now, or noticed a few years back, is I started to try and mimic their leadership style, sometimes their tone, their behaviors. And I started to really lose that sense of who am I? What am I as a leader? And actually, it was when I read a paper, and I would encourage, in fact, I talked about it with one of our interns today, a paper called "Why Should Anyone Be Led by You?" It's in HBR, it's by a business guru called Rob Goffey. And that really talks about authenticity and how we all really value authenticity in the leaders that we respect and follow. And from reading that paper, actually, I became really much more comfortable with my true self and what I really believe in, what's important to me. And so now, as I talk to our young leaders and more broadly to graduates, I say, look, take the time to really understand what are the 3 or 4 values, behaviors, traits that you really, really believe in, that are true to you. And then make sure you demonstrate them. Learn from other leaders, absolutely, please do. But don't try mimicking and copying others, because ultimately that's an act, and you can do that for a short space of time, but it gets really, really tiring after a while.
Piece of advice, Ben. Thank you so much. We're coming towards the end, and we're going to let you off the hook in a moment or two, but a couple of final questions. Final question on the vaccine, and then a couple of other questions just to finish. Question on the vaccine is, do you think it's possible in the future for a vaccine to be produced that will only need to be administered once, giving lifelong protection against COVID? So I guess it's bringing us right back to where we started, and something again reflecting on I guess the journey that we're still on in relation to COVID and vaccination.
Yeah, so hope and think, I guess, a different hit. My hope is, clearly we can eradicate COVID across the globe and here in the UK through vaccination. Undoubtedly, though, we're going to need future vaccinations for some time yet. I'm not going to put a time frame on that, because that's for JCVI and others, government to decide. I think we have learned a huge amount about vaccine technology, but also about how the COVID virus behaves, the genetic drivers of that, some of the variants over the last 18 months, and the UK has played a really critical role in that. And I hope that we will then take that learning and continue to really invest, not just as Pfizer, but broadly across life sciences, government, and others to try and get to that place where either it is, a one-off shot, or it's a case where we've actually eradicated the disease. But it's not something I think we're close to right now, unfortunately.
Okay. So finally, I guess I'm going to take us back to reflecting on the fact that we're doing this talk virtually rather than in person, and a reminder, I guess, of the extraordinary 18 months that we've all been through. And we've all spent probably more time than we thought we would in our offices or in our homes, staring at screens. And there's a question to finish with, but please feel free to answer it in any way you wish, which is obviously we can see a wall behind you with beautiful, colourful prints. And the question is, only if appropriate, what's the colourful print behind you, and is it significant? But it obviously brings us back to a much more fundamental, I guess, point about the fact that we've been through this extraordinary journey and have got much more used to other people's houses and homes than maybe we thought we ever would. But I don't know whether you want to say anything, Ben, about what's behind you on the wall.
Yeah. No, I will do. And thank you for the question, whoever asked that. I really like that, and a great one to finish on. When we first came into the pandemic and we were all running Zoom calls and Teams calls, I had a pretty bland background, to be honest. And my wife gave me some feedback. In fact, I'd done some media work, and she said, "Look, that looks dreadful, Ben. We've got to sort that out." And then I started to recognize that in many Zoom calls and team calls that I was having, I was genuinely interested with what I could see in, the snippet of someone's life, whether that be their living room or the kitchen that they were working from. And, we had some great conversations about pieces of art, books that you could see, or just things that were in the room. So I decided that I was going to, try and have a little bit of a better backdrop. And so the things behind me, that the Science Will Win picture, my 6-year-old daughter made, and that was a sign that she put in the window of our house. And I took that down a little while back and put that in a frame, and it's something I will treasure, I think, for forever. The picture up above that is my son. He was mentioned by Jaya at the beginning. He's what inspires me every single day, and it's what really keeps me going. My little map on the right there, that was a map of a 50-mile race I did, and again it keeps reminding me that we're doing a really important work and there's lots to do, but don't sit in front of the screen all day. Don't lose sight of the fact that you've got to get out for a run, and that's a healthy reminder. And then finally, the B behind me is actually a Ben Osborn print that a very good friend of mine bought me for a major birthday of mine a few years back. And I just thought it's super bright, and do you know what? It's created so many conversations that I just can't move it now. So no, great question, and thank you for asking.
Sharing that with us, Ben. So I'm going to draw proceedings to a close. I'd like to finish firstly by saying that we've had not a question in, but a comment from Geoffrey Bolland, who's actually Dr. Bolland's son, and was that young man that visited Pfizer with his dad all that time ago. And it's just a comment that he has said, Ben, many thanks for your talk and for Pfizer's fine contribution to managing this pandemic. So just wanted to share that with you. And it only remains for me to say thank you so much for giving us such a thought-provoking and inspirational, but also a very real, authentic talk. I've learned so much, but also thank you too for answering all of those questions so well, and being very honest with us as well about the journey that you've been on and that Pfizer have been on in the context of the journey that we've all been on over the last 18 months. So thank you very much for becoming part of the UE family tonight, and for sharing your insights with us, and best of luck with the next stage of your journey.
Thank you, Amanda. And it's been an absolute pleasure and honor. Really appreciate it. Thank you.
Okay. Bye, everyone. Thank you.